So this is Paul Cummins. I have known about Paul Cummins forever. He is a legend in Los Angeles. He's an educator, but an educator who has a very forward-thinking perspective. And his forward-thinking perspective, he's the founder of Crossroads High School, by the way, where, one of the best private high schools in the city, right? One of our team members is a teacher there. It's a fabulous high school, and he's gone on to found another school called New Roads. I'm not going to give you big introductions of people's credits, because we have a board out there, and you can read them. I'll tell you more about what I think about them, why they're on the program. So the philosophy that Paul is subscribed to, and that he's going to talk about here, is so dear to my heart. I have a book that I have bought over 1,000 copies of. Has anybody here bought 1,000 copies of anything? You can't know me without having had to read this book, because it's a creation story. It's how we all came to be. And because I can do this here now, I can show you my little personal tidbits. Okay, here's the book. It's called The Universe is a Green Dragon by Brian Swim. Yes, and my friends here have read this book. So. Who, by the way, is one of the world's most wonderful human beings. Not just a good book, but a fabulous being. And he couldn't come, unfortunately. He's in Northern California. But I would have given him the stage in a minute, obviously. But Paul is going to talk to you about the mentor, Thomas Berry, who was Brian Swim's mentor. In fact, they wrote a book together called The Universe Story, and he pays great homage to Thomas Berry. So it is with double pleasure that I give you Paul Cummins.
Thank you, Dick. Thank you all. It's a real honor to be here with such an incredible group of speakers and such an incredibly enlightened audience in this wonderful place. I think it was about 13 years ago that my daughter came to see me. She had to talk, and she had just gotten back from a trip to Europe, and she said, "Dad, I think I know now what I want to do with my life." And I said, "What's that?" And she said, "I think I want to be an environmental worker." And I said, "Well, Anna, I'm really very proud of you, but I also have to confess to just a little bit of sadness in that decision." And she said, "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "Well, I'm afraid you're going to experience nothing but heartbreak for your whole career." And she said, "Oh, Dad, I know we're screwed, but I want to do what I can." And I thought, my God, when I was her age, I thought the world was my oyster. I did not think that there were huge problems that couldn't be overcome. I didn't think we were doomed as a species or as a planet, which many people now think we are. I graduated from Stanford in 1959, never having heard the word ecology. I didn't know the word, I didn't know the concept. Rachel Carson hadn't written her book. That was going to come 3 years later. And so notions of global warming or losing our glaciers or soil erosion all over the planet or holes in the ozone layer, or deforestation, or massive overpopulation that is threatening everything. These were not concepts that I and my classmates were dealing with when we graduated and went on into our various careers. Something's happened in the last 30, 40, 50 years that's pretty dramatic. We just heard a song about it. And many of you probably heard the story, but there was this guy sitting in his living room one night reading, and he hears a knock at the door. And he goes and opens the door, he looks around, and there's nothing there. He looks down, he happens to see a snail there, so he reaches down, picks it, and fires it across the lawn, slams the door, and goes back. But a year later, he's sitting in his living room again reading. Here's a knock at the door. He goes and opens the door, looks around, nothing there. He looks down, there's a snail. And the snail looks up at him and says, "What the hell was that about?" And so you have to wonder, what the hell has this last 40 years been about? Well, there have been a bunch of stories that people have told. Economic stories, many extraordinary scientific stories about how we got to where we are today, where in a 40, 50-year period, we're now talking about the possible extinction of all species, the doom of the planet, and so on and so on. So how did we get there? Well, there are many stories of how we got there, and one of my beliefs that I've come here, as Suzanne said, to share with you, is that we have the wrong story. And that it is our very own story, our own creation stories, and our story of our relationship to the earth that has got us into this mess in the first place. So the kind of the Christian, Judeo-biblical story about God creating the heavens and earth and giving man dominion over the heavens and earth is what the very story that Thomas Berry says we need to take a hard look at. And what Berry says is that we are not transcendent to the earth, we human beings. We are of the earth. We came out of the earth. We are stardust become conscious of itself, which is an extraordinary concept. But it seems to me dead on accurate. And what has happened is that in this 13.7.8 billion year story of our universe and the roughly 4.6 billion years of Earth, that it's been a natural process that has evolved and evolved and evolved. And if, as Barry and some others have done, if you take a look at the 4.6 billion years of the Earth and take that into 24 hours and look at it as a 24-hour period, we human beings are in the last 30 seconds of that, and modern history is the last 3 or 4 seconds. And in the last 2 or 3, 4 seconds, we human beings have taken what Barry calls a process that has been on automatic pilot all these billions of years, and in a few seconds we've put it on manual. And who's at the switch? Us. And what is driving us? Part of it is the story of our not being of the earth, but having dominion over the earth. Well, that was a benign story until the big paradigm shift, which what I think is the big paradigm shift of the last 300-400 years, which is the industrial technological revolution. Because when that happened, 3 things happened. First of all, it brought people off of farms into the cities. And so relationships to the earth got fewer and fewer and fewer. And secondly then, this creature, these human beings now had the power to take their dominion over the earth and really mess it up really badly, which is what we've done. I'm blanking on his first name, Cummins. David Cummins said that there have been 5 sort of major losses of species over the history of the planet, and or 6 actually. He said in the first 5 were basically these massive losses of species, extinctions, were caused by what he calls a shitstorm of asteroids. So, but the 6th shitstorm is us, human beings, having taken this evolutionary process off of automatic pilot and putting it on manual. So the second thing we've done is to take our dominion over the earth, and at best we're caretakers, but we have not been good caretakers, and we've been destroyers. And it's the third thing, horrible thing that this paradigm shift has done is to reinforce a whole new mythology, which is the mythology of progress. And that progress is somehow measurable in economic terms, in terms of profit, in terms of gross national product, and so on and so on. And so what we are defining as progress is really the depletion of our resources. So we're defining progress as the destruction of our home, our Mother Earth. And I don't mean that as some la-la granola head. It's just a reality that the earth is where we live. It is our home, and it is what we came out of. So that's the bad news part of my little talk here today. Is there good news? Yes, there's good news, I believe. And the good news is that most of the problems that we're going to be talking about here today, and that I've been alluding to, were created by human beings. Consequently, human beings could correct these and change these. But as Thomas Berry says, not only do we have the wrong story, we're in between stories. We don't have the new story yet, but it's all around us, and it's in this room. And the threads of the new story are represented by the speakers here today, the organizations that many of you represent, and we somehow have to weave them into a new story. Primitive people, we call them primitive, had a relationship to the earth. They lived in harmony with the earth. They had a sense of reverence for the earth. And they celebrated the earth. Well, we need to get back to that. We need to go forward by getting back to that, but somehow harmonizing it with what we know about evolution and about biology and about astrophysics and about all the science that we now know. We somehow have to use that with and weave that in to this new story of a relationship to the earth. So it would mean a fundamentally different approach to education. And I mentioned my daughter at the beginning of this speech. One of the things that I've learned from my daughter, she and her husband, a young man named Marcus Erickson, created their own little foundation called 5 Gyres, and they've gone around the world researching the different gyres where ocean currents come and create these slow-moving masses where garbage collects and decomposes, and little fish eat what they think is plankton, but it's little pieces of plastic, and so on up the chain. And one of the things that they were talking to me about once is the concept of a throwaway society, which I'd never really thought too much about until you start asking yourself, where is away? There is no away. This earth is our home, so you can't throw anything away without damaging your home. And then I got to thinking, well, in our education system, not only do we not teach that, but we also are willing to throw away children. And we throw away children by giving them a miserable education and by having set up the system that we have in this country where some people get a super education and others get a terrible education. And, what was the old bumper sticker? If you think education is expensive, try ignorance. Suzanne, when she introduced me, talked about my old school, Crossroads School. Crossroads this year will be spending about $32,000 per pupil. And my other daughter, Emily, works in a school district called Lenox, which is a dirt poor community over by LAX, by the airport, and they're spending $5,000 per pupil. Now, it's completely upside down. The kids in Lenox are the ones that need the $32,000 spent on them. The kids who go to Crossroads are going to do just fine in this world. But I don't want to take that $32,000 away from them. I want the kids in Lenox to get a $32,000 per pupil education. And the reason is that the $32,000 is not luxury, it's quality. So let's give quality to every child in America, and not just the kids who happen to have the good fortune to have been born to parents who can send them to private schools or who live in neighborhoods where they spend a realistic amount of money, an adequate amount of money per pupil. Whoever gives me the hook, now you better shout out at me, hook, because I'm just getting warmed up on this, and I know I'm supposed to only talk for 9 minutes, so I'll try and bring it to a swifter close. And just so you know how, as the song said, effed up our values are, we're spending the 6,000 in some small school districts per pupil, the 32 at Crossroads, and then depending on who you talk to, my foundation, New Visions Foundation, has had a program at a place called Camp Gonzales, which is one of the 14 incarceration facilities around Los Angeles. And the previous chief of probation admitted to me one day that they're spending, he thinks, about $125,000 a year per bed up there. And Connie Rice, who many of you know of, said that's a complete crock. She said they're spending like over $200,000 to lock a boy up. So we're willing to spend $200,000 to lock kids up, $5,000 to educate them, and $32,000 to give a quality education to the privileged kids of our society. It led British writer Marina Warner to say, well, you know, in America you have expensive children and you have cheap children. And we do. What's the net result of that? Injustice is expensive. But it's not only expensive because you're spending somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000 to lock a kid up. It's expensive because then those kids are not getting the quality education that would lead them to go out in society and do good things. So there's a boy who's an intern at our foundation who I got to know at Camp Gonzales. What we do up at Camp Gonzales is bring elective programs to kids that they would get if they went to Crossroads. So the irony is here they're locked up in a probation facility, and for the first time in their lives, many of them are falling in love with education because they're getting the kind of things they should be getting in the public schools. Well, one boy, Edwin, when he got out, we went and met with his family, and it's a long story, but we sent Edwin off to one of these kind of tough love boarding schools in Colorado. We flew him there twice so that they would accept him on full scholarship. And the first thing they did was take Edwin out on a 4-day vision quest where he had to be all by himself out there. He almost freaked out. This is an inner city kid who's been locked up several times, but he gutted it out, and it totally changed his life. So one of the things that we need to do in education is also, and one of the reasons we need to spend more money on our schools, is to get kids outdoors, to get them on not just field trips, but trips where they can go sleep under the stars, where they can take walks on the beach. How are we going to save this planet if we have no relationship to it? And if we have kids in inner city schools that have never, a mile from the ocean, who've never seen the oceans. So we need to have garden projects, and these are part, and these trips to the outdoors, these are part of the strands that we need to weave together into this new story. And the new story, I'm getting the hook, okay, I will wrap it up. The new story is that the earth is not something to exploit, it's something to revere, to celebrate, and to recognize the interdependence of all of us. And if I have time, I'd like to read just conclude with a few lines from a poem by William Stafford, a wonderful 20th century poet. And the controlling metaphor in this poem is a circus coming to town with the lead elephant and coming into town, and then behind the elephant behind him is holding his tail by the trunk, and tail, trunk, and so all the elephants are coming into town, and if the elephant makes a wrong turn, the circus doesn't get to town. And we've made a wrong turn with our creation stories. We need to get the new story, and we all need to push for it in every way we can. The poem is entitled A Ritual to Read to Each Other. If you don't know the kind of person I am, and I don't know the kind of person you are, a pattern that others made may prevail in the world, and following the wrong God home, we may miss our star. And as elephants parade holding each elephant's tail, but if one wanders, the circus won't find the park. I call it cruel, and maybe the root of all cruelty, to know what occurs, but not recognize the fact. And so I appeal to a voice, to something shadowy, a remote, important region in all who talk. Though we could fool each other, we should consider, lest the parade of our mutual life get lost in the dark. For it is important that awake people be awake, or a breaking line may discourage them back to sleep. The signals we give, yes or no or maybe, should be clear. The darkness around us is deep. Thank you very much.